Hey guys, Clinton Foster here with Broken Arrow Armory. Like we told you guys in the first video, we're going to get political on this channel. What we're about to show is an interview we did with Senator Ogden Driskill from Northeast Wyoming. He's the Vice President of the Senate down in Cheyenne. He's sponsoring a really good bill right now. We're going to talk about that. It's kind of a long interview. We talk about some things that, maybe off subject a little bit, but they're still relevant. Politicians fighting amongst themselves within the parties. It's just a lot of stuff going on, you guys. Take notice. And with that, we'll get right to the interview. My name's Clinton Foster. We're here with Broken Arrow Armory and Ammunition. I told you guys this channel is going to be a little bit political. We're sitting here with Senator Ogden Driskill. He's Northeast Wyoming, and you've been in for how many years now?
10.
10? Go ahead and introduce yourself, Ogden.
Ogden Driskill. I live at Devil's Tower, Vice President of the Senate in Wyoming. Proudly serving the state of Wyoming.
So, what we're here to talk about today is everybody knows what's going on in Virginia, stuff like that. There's massive uprisings, big Second Amendment movements. A governor quoted that he was going to hunt and kill Second Amendment people for not turning in their guns and stuff like that. Well, even though we don't really have to do this, the state of Wyoming has stepped up and they're making a law that's making that illegal. And that's why we got Ogden here today, because he's a sponsor on this bill. And we're going to sit here and talk to him about that. And we've also got some other bills in Wyoming that have been fairly hot across the nation. Other states have passed the similar bill, and a gentleman in Kansas just went to prison for it. Or he got 1 year probation. He didn't go to prison, he got 1 year probation. But it's still one of those things that we should all talk about. I'm an FFL and an SOT, so we're going to talk about some of that stuff and just put that out there so we can show you that the state of Wyoming is doing the right thing to protect our Second Amendment rights and everything, and being a leader in this.
I'll kind of join in at that, and this bill's kind of the latest in a long series of rights bills to do with firearms in the state of Wyoming, and they go back probably some of the early ones. 2010 was the Firearms Freedom Act. That was the year before I went in the legislature. 2011, Wyoming was one of the first states in the nation to pass a Concealed Carry Act where you could open carry. It actually wasn't concealed carry, it was open carry. I was co-sponsor on that. Followed closely by some castle doctrine laws about defense in your house and being able to use firearms in your home and defending your home. Yep. On to the streets. Wyoming's been a leader in allowing school districts to arm teachers and people inside the schools. One of the early states that allowed suppressors for hunting in it. There was only a handful of them. So Wyoming's kind of been on the cutting edge of firearm regulations, and all of these bills as they come out, you hear the exact same thing you hear on this bill is, why do we need it? We already have that right. It's not a big deal. These gun laws are unnecessary. I will tell you that Virginia probably thought they were unnecessary a decade ago, and gun buybacks are for serious things. They tend to be precursors to involuntary seizure of weapons, so the first step is to make sure that we're not using public or private dollars to go buy these weapons backed by a government agency. I really don't have a problem if somebody privately wants to try to buy firearms off. That's fine game. Mm-hmm. But for the government to be involved in it is absolutely taboo as far as I'm concerned. And it makes sense for Wyoming to be on the cutting edge. It's much easier to have a bill in place that prohibits it than it is to try to defend yourself after somebody's enacted it, which is very possibly could happen in Wyoming in the next decade. Is you could have a town. It's probably not going to be a government agency as a whole, but it's going to be a town that tries to do it. And we've had kind of a mini move on that. A fellow named Lyle Williams is currently about to go in front of the Supreme Court in Wyoming about open carry on the University of Wyoming campus. That's not a seizure one, but it's actually something that no one would have envisioned a decade ago that we were going to have our university arrest somebody and throw them off campus for open carry, which is legal in Wyoming. And they used some interesting arguments to get there.
Yeah. And that's something I didn't even know about. Hadn't even heard about that. I'll have to pay closer attention.
Yeah, Lyle went to court, and the initial piece of it, they remanded it back to the courts again. They'll rule one more time, and ultimately it will probably end up in front of the Supreme Court, whether University of Wyoming has the ability to regulate guns on their campus. The Wyoming laws very narrowly give the Wyoming legislature the ability to control guns. So the cities, towns, counties really don't have that ability. If the legislature goes on an overarching end of it, that stops any regulation that lays underneath of it.
Yeah. And that's where you guys have stepped in with this new bill to kind of tell everybody, hey, no, you're not doing this. This is what the law is. We're setting up that wall right now. You're not tearing it down.
Absolutely. Preemptively, we're going in there and saying, look, you don't bother trying doing it because it's against law. You're going to have to change the statute if you want to do it.
Well, even in Wyoming in the past few years, you read in the Casper Star Tribune, there's always people letter the editors, or you're on a Facebook post or something like that you guys will post. Somebody from Casper or Cheyenne or Western Wyoming will post on there that Wyoming needs to be preemptive and start regulating guns more. And so you guys are just stepping in and shutting those people down right now because they're wanting us to infringe on their second. They're wanting to infringe on their second.
I agree fully with you. You know, Wyoming's fought a current that's below the top that you really don't see.
Yeah.
But there's a very strong move to niche away at Second Amendment rights in Wyoming, and even worse in other states. And, you know, for myself as a senator, the right to unabridged right to bear arms in the Wyoming Constitution can't get much clearer than that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I take it seriously, and I really don't believe that anybody has much right. We have caught some grief because we take these laws nick at a time. Guns in schools, they say, well, why can't you just say you can have guns there? Or, well, those bills don't pass.
Yeah.
Firearms bills are tough. This bill, interestingly enough, my answer to these bills that people say they're not necessary is don't debate on them. Let's just pass them and put them there because it really doesn't matter. It's irrelevant at that point. But you find out often that these bills that weren't necessary become very necessary, and then you find yourself defending yourself instead of having the high ground.
Yeah. And you're also one of the guys that's very highly backed by the NRA too, aren't you?
I am. I'm an A+, and I've been, you know, I've sponsored, well, the silencer bill was mine by myself. I was a co-sponsor on the open carry bill.
I remember that because you worked with Thunder Beast.
I did.
To get that one.
Thunder Beast helped me a lot. Yep. They were good hands, and it was a good common sense bill. And it, ironically, you'd think that bill's a fairly easy bill, and it was opposed by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, the Outfitters and Guides Association, Farm Bureau, stock growers. All of those groups came out opposed to us licensing or being able to possess silencers in Wyoming.
And in my experiences with them, most people don't even clearly understand what a suppressor does.
Absolutely. Well, and I've been calling them the wrong term. I'm sitting here calling them silencers, and they really are not. They're suppressors. And
suppressors, silencers, they all do the same.
Yeah.
I mean, in the bill at the NFA, they're called suppressors/silencers. So, I mean, but most people don't even understand. If you shoot this gun with a suppressor on it, you're still going to know that a gun went off.
Absolutely.
2 or 3 rounds, you might not know where it came from in perspective, but you're still going to know that a gun goes off if one goes off with a can on it.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. It's not what you see in the movies that you see the little out of a pistol and it's gone. And no, they definitely have a sound to them. And,
they're not hearing safe. Everybody thinks that they're hearing safe. These two suppressors here, 223 cans, normal sound on them is about 168 decibels, 66 decibels. That'll kill 30 decibels on them. You know, that's still way above
what you should be hearing. Yeah.
But essentially, that's just putting another set of earplugs in your ear under your earmuffs.
Yeah, the military used them extensively to help prevent hearing loss. I was just at an audiologist getting hearing aids last year, and interestingly enough, the lady that did my hearing aids in Gillette was a consultant for the military, and she knew all about the bill and had known what it had done. I'd never talked to her. It was kind of interesting to talk to her.
Yeah, and I mean, they really are that makes shooting more enjoyable, you know.
Yep.
So, before we get to this bill here, I kind of like to talk about what happened in Kansas with this bill that you weren't really even a part of because you hadn't even been in the Senate yet. But it's the Firearm Freedoms Act. Reason I kind of want to talk about this is because what this bill does is essentially says that if you buy material and machine your own suppressor or gun or whatever you want to make, as long as it's stamped made in Wyoming or made in whatever state that this law is passed in, it's legal. Well, recently there's been a case in Kansas where it was not that way. The gentleman did get in trouble. All he got was probation for it, but he did get in trouble, and it was a little bit more involved than what people think, because the Supreme Court essentially ruled that a suppressor is not a firearm. It's not protected under the Second Amendment. They ruled that it is an accessory to a firearm, not protected under the Second Amendment, because it is not required to fire the firearm.
Which they've done in other cases. That's bump stocks and other things.
Yep. So what is your take on a bill like this that essentially says the state of Wyoming allows this, but the federal government is not?
So this is one of a trend, and the real example to use in truth, and it goes back to your Constitution on Article 10, is what states' rights are. And, interestingly enough, they're selling marijuana in Colorado right now because of the exact same thing. As Colorado has made a conscious choice not to follow federal laws, and the feds have declined to step in. We have the same thing on some immigration issues in different areas. I would suspicion we'll see it in many more areas. Once the feds, we're seeing it in Wyoming right now. Interestingly enough, multiple counties have come out and said they're not enforcing the new vaping cigarette laws in Wyoming. They'll enforce it to 18 as state law has.
Yeah.
But if the feds want to enforce it, they can come in and enforce it themselves, but they certainly aren't going to force it on our people.
Yes.
So those are examples you see where federal laws have been challenged, and I think it clearly shows over time the overstep of the federal government usurping rights that were specifically reserved under the Constitution for the states.
Yeah. So, and in this fight here, the governor of Kansas pretty much just stepped out of the way. He made a couple comments on it, but he didn't really put a foot forward to put a barrier in between the federal government and the citizen of Kansas, to where the United States Gun Owners of America stepped in and they went to fight with him, which is how it ended up in the Supreme Court of the United States. What would the state of Wyoming do in a situation like this?
I can't speak for the governor. The governor's who directs the attorney general whether to defend or to not defend. My suspicion would be is the state would stand down and watch it. I'm not positive, but I believe that Lyle Williams' case that I visited with you earlier about with the University of Wyoming falls under this bill.
Ooh,
and so it's actually a piece of it. I have not followed that case closely.
Okay.
So I can't tell you a lot about it other than Lyle Williams with a number of others went to the Wyoming State Republican Convention that happened to be on University of Wyoming property. And the university asked them to leave and not come back with weapons, and they chose that it was legal under law, and they chose to cite Lyle, and I believe they cited him for criminal trespass, not for guns. But it ties back to the guns. It went to the lower courts, went up to the higher court, and then was remanded back. So we've got some more time until it comes back to court to see the final ruling.
And that's technically what the federal government did here. They didn't exactly go after the 10 years in prison, $10,000 fine of owning a unregistered NFA weapon. They got him for tax evasion. They claimed
didn't pay the $200 stamp or whatever.
So they got him for tax evasion. So there's two different ways of getting a person there, And so that's where the information on this stuff, we as people are become more and more bold with the Second Amendment, more and more people are telling, we don't care what the government is doing now because they're trying to take our rights away. You see that in Virginia.
We see it clearly, and we see it in other states. They make it a felony to own an assault-type weapon.
Yep.
That's clearly, in my opinion, a violation of constitutional rights. The founders not just envision rifles, they envisioned an armed militia, and
Oh yeah.
basically anything from cannons down is legal for that reason.
Yeah.
They took it very seriously, and it wasn't firearms for personal protection or for hunting. It was firearms for a militia.
Oh yeah.
And I look at it the same way. It's exactly that way. And part of our problem with guns is they've been villainized by the liberal end of the world.
Oh, very much.
The guns really aren't the problem. It's an education on what they are and what they do. And then I do fault somewhat our Hollywood mentality is most people don't understand what guns really do to people because they watch movies and all you do is see bad guys fall down and die.
Exactly.
So it makes it a lot easier for a kid to end up being not very smart with handling a firearm.
Yes. Do you think that, because back in the 60s and 70s, didn't they used to have firearms training in schools?
You know, they have in different states, and ironically, that you ask about it, I'm bringing a bill this year to bring hunter safety and firearm safety back into our schools.
Well, that'd be great, because then not only will kids get a head start, and they're not trying to take that hunter safety class at 7 o'clock.
No, we're going to have it where you get a hunter safety class, so when you graduate from this PE class, you will have the hunter safety certificate. I actually think it's critical in Wyoming at this point. We're having a large amount of people move in from out of state, that many of them from states that aren't gun type states.
Yep.
And it is tradition in Wyoming is not unusual at all. Other states regulate whether you can have guns around a house. They have to be locked up or have to have a trigger lock on them.
Yeah.
It's certainly not unusual in Wyoming to have a pistol in the console of a pickup, a rifle hanging in the back window, or a rifle inside the front door that probably doesn't have the shells in the chamber, but certainly does in the magazine.
Yeah.
No one wants an untrained child that doesn't know what a gun is to pick one of those up and shoot his friend. There's no one that would wish that on anybody. And so whether you love or hate guns, teaching gun safety should be a key part of our curriculum in our schools.
Do you think that a lot of the problem in the United States with gun now is lack of knowledge?
I think it's certainly some. I think a big part of it is no exposure. They just aren't ever around them. And the example I'll give you on that, interestingly enough, was a number of years ago we had a CNN correspondent came to the ranch, and I was told he was very liberal and be careful. And so we went out and we were looking at cows, and he was doing filming on ranching in the West. And ironically, as we were caking cows, he noticed I had a rifle on the seat of the pickup, and he asked, "Do you actually use this?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Why would you have one in your pickup?" And I said, "It's for predators or whatever else. You may need to put a cow down at some point in time, but we use them often." And he said, "I've never really been around guns." And so I asked him if he'd like to shoot. And ironically, we shot the rifle a little bit, and we went back and took out some old burn cans out of my garbage barrel, and he shot a dozen or so shots with a 45 pistol, and then he spent an hour to dig all the slugs out, and he carefully packed the 2 cans in tissue paper with the slugs and flew them home with him. It was a lifetime experience for him. And he told me, he said, "I had no understanding of why people had guns or why you needed them or why you would want them." And I do think that's a big part of it. Huge amount of people in towns, you have fear of what you haven't been around or haven't seen, and their conception of gun is a bad guy robbing them.
Yeah.
It's not a conception that I have one to keep a bad guy from robbing me. And you can flip that both directions and make that work.
Well, especially where we live out here. I mean, you live in a very small town. What do you think the officer reply to a call out of your place would be?
Oh, we know what it is, I can tell you.
45 minutes, an hour?
Years ago, we had a very bad thing happen at a business we were in, and they were over an hour getting responded to it, and it was a deal someone could have got hurt, without a doubt.
Well, in Sundance here, there was a court self-defense case that got ruled self-defense, and it was a gentleman who protected himself against another gentleman and had taken his life. And in town, it was like 30 minutes before the cops showed up. Because small towns like where we're at,
you've got 1 or 2 cops. Sometimes they don't even have the car at their house.
Yeah, they don't have the resources to keep a 24-hour cop on. So, I think some of it is that people just don't understand lifestyles and what the actual intent of what they're doing with the use of the firearm is for. I preach, and I'm actually trying to become a firearms instructor, because you see so many people at the range and they live out in the middle of nowhere, but they have firearms, but then they have no perception of actually how to use it correctly.
Right.
And so, it's a bad culture in both ways, because a lot of people don't even, that own them and believe in them, they don't take the time to become proficient with them and safe with them. And then when somebody's a dipstick and is shooting their buddy in the leg because they don't know what they're doing, that ends up a bad perception with the media, and the leftists can take it and run. So we're actually on a double-edged sword of where...
We are, and everybody always picks the worst case scenarios. I can tell you, when we did the open carry law, everyone was like, how many people are going to die with people packing guns that they get mad? Well, the answer has been, and it's been, I believe, 8 years now, the answer is unequivocally zero. In Wyoming. We haven't had one. We don't have a single case of it.
And the only mass shooting we had was that kid in Casper that shot his dad, who was a professor with a crossbow.
Right. We have had the Stand Your Ground bill. We have had a death on it, and it'll go to the Supreme Court in Wyoming. And that'll be an interesting case study as well. It's not a firearms bill, but it involves firearms.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with that one. Is that like a castle bill?
It's on steroids. It basically says that you've got no duty to retreat inside your house if someone comes at you aggressively and comes in your house.
No, in Texas, they had a case where a gentleman shot his daughter's boyfriend, who had climbed up the ladder into her room, and he heard a noise, and when he opened up the door, all he saw was a silhouette, and shot and ended up killing that young man. And he got off on that. I mean, he felt really bad about it, but he got off on it because of the castle law in Texas.
Yeah. There's numbers of those cases yearly, and they're tragic, but the truth is everyone needs to assume that someone in a house is armed, and if you're going to climb through a window or try to knock somebody's door down, the assumption should be that the person inside is armed.
Yep. So now I'd like to talk about this bill that we've got going on here. I'll do a little bit of reading on it. It says this is an act relating to firearms, clarifying the applicability of the preemption of firearms regulation by the state, prohibiting governmental entities from operating firearm buyback programs, conforming language, and providing for an effective date. Essentially, this is a bill stating that the state of Wyoming, cities, towns, townships, counties, no one can issue a buyback on a firearm.
Correct.
This is battling what is currently going on in Virginia right now, because, like we've been talking about, the climate for the Second Amendment has changed. And so even though the Second Amendment says shall not be infringed, bills like these are protecting us in the future from instances where maybe Wyoming does turn liberal at some point.
Well, and these are even a little different. A buyback actually is a transaction between a willing buyer and seller. And so in a way, it really isn't a total Second Amendment one. It's more the fact that if you're a solid Second Amendment, it's not a good spend of government money to go buy firearms out there when you've got an open firearms market.
Yeah.
There's also empirical evidence that gun buybacks don't work.
Yes.
Guys use them to get rid of their junk guns. If they got a Saturday night special, they'll go take the money from it and then go buy a better gun.
Yeah.
Probably doesn't work exactly the way they want it. And I don't think it's anything that the government should have a role in.
Yeah.
Like I say, if Michael Bloomberg wants to go spend $1 billion of his money to buy guns from people, that's his right. He can just go to gun shows and buy them right and left.
Yeah.
But for a city or a government to do it, because usually what follows the buyback is somewhere after it is going to be a mandatory seizure of certain guns that are left.
Yes.
They're going to say, well, we've bought back what we could. Now we're going to do shotguns with barrels less than 20 inches. We're going to do assault rifles. We're going to do clips, guns with magazines that hold over 20.
Yeah.
And that's a natural progression if you allow buybacks to happen. Is buybacks don't get voted on by people that love guns. It's people that hate guns, and it's just the first niche in taking guns away.
So it seems like because we never really had Second Amendment issues until the Obama era. As long as I've been an adult watching the situation, what do you think happened during the Obama administration that brought a lot of this on? Because it just seemed like politics went from, Kennedy Democrats to even the Kennedy Democrats are now just so far left.
Well, I think we've just seen a absolute change between left and right in the parties, and both sides are driven to the edges. And
Yep.
you know, the middle's not very visible, and you're not sure where it's at. The Democrats, when you look at what's going on in the impeachment hearings right now, it's absolutely insane how far to the left they've gone.
Well, they won't even turn the articles of impeachment over to
Tuesday.
Oh, they're going over Tuesday.
Yeah, so, but they're really off to the left when you look at what it is.
Yeah.
It really is sad, and just as sad is the Republicans on the far right are just about as crazy part of them, and that's
Yeah.
I'll catch grief for that. But I can tell you in Wyoming, you know, there's a split of the party that considers me liberal.
Yeah.
And I'm actually exceptionally offended by it. You know, on the conservative polls, I run in the top 5% consistently on my party, and yet we've got a purity test by some of the leadership in our party that are saying that you're not conservative enough, and I find that really interesting.
But you're not bound to the party. You're bound to your constituents and the people that hired you to do that job.
So I look at it slightly differently. I'm a lifelong Republican, and ironically, I went to state conventions for close to 40 years and was not only a precinct person but a state committee man,
Yep.
and went through the end of it. And you know, I take being a Republican seriously,
Yeah.
and you know, that end of it, I do have some base values of mine that tie to the party. But back to guns. We've got a distinct split in the party. The party I grew up in, being a Republican, meant that you were conservative fiscally,
Yeah.
and you believed that it was a big tent party, that you really didn't care what happened socially. And somewhere over the last 20 years, we've had the social side move in, and you can be the most conservative Republican in the world,
Yes.
and if you're not socially on their page, they consider you a liberal.
Yeah.
And their page, you know, is, you know, your abortion, your gay rights, LGBT bills. There's numbers of those. And for anybody in Wyoming that has anything to do with any of those bills, they come out and openly attack them. And
Yeah.
you know, I tend to follow the same place they do, but I take major offense about being attacked.
Yeah.
That's one of the major platforms of what the party is that I was a part of. Is
Yeah.
I really grew up that the Republican Party was, like I said, fiscally conservative, less government, less money spent, efficient government, and then turned a blind eye towards what happened on the other end is live and let live. And
Yeah.
it's still the kind of Republican I am, and that's not to say that I don't fit in their mold on most of their issues.
Yeah.
But I refuse to be blackmailed or shoved into a mold that is one I'm uncomfortable with putting me there.
Yeah. Well, and I think as a younger, you know, I kind of grew up with the LGBT, all that stuff, and you know, kind of getting off track a little bit. But I've been around the nation. You know, I've been on the road between Nashville and LA, and I can tell you I've met gay people that were great. But the thing about it is, if you just let people live the lives that they want to live, I think we would all get along a little bit better, and that's where we're faltering now as a country.
You know, that's where Wyoming shines. Interestingly enough, nationally, Wyoming's image, because of what happened in Laramie, is that we hate gays and we're really a backward state. And the truth is, Wyoming's communities have a very thriving gay community.
Yeah.
And the truth is, no one in Wyoming messes with them. They are pillars in our communities. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're...
Well, it's been a great conversation with you here. We touched on a couple more issues than I thought we were going to touch on, but
yeah, we wandered off the second
a little bit. But I think we got what I was sitting down here with you to try and get is the reason you guys are putting this bill out is to combat the current.
Oh, it's preemptive. There's no doubt in the world, and you know, I'll give you one last example on that, and it mirrors this bill. So, my first year in the legislature, Senator Hicks and myself sponsored a constitutional amendment to constitutionally protect the right to hunt, fish, and trap in the state of Wyoming. And it was a very hard bill to pass. It was attacked roundly by the press, by all the groups. We got it out, the governor signed it, it went on the ballot, and it passed, I believe, in the high 70% margin. People of Wyoming obviously believed in it once you got it outside the legislature. Ironically, in the last 2 years, if we wouldn't have that, there's groups in Jackson that would be actively running bills right now to make it illegal to do trapping in the state of Wyoming.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
The only thing that's held them back is it's a constitutional right to trap in Wyoming. So now they're working on how they can jack with regulations to make it difficult to trap. But that bill had the exact same ring to it when we did. They said, why in the world? We already do all this in Wyoming.
Yeah.
No one's ever going to challenge the right to hunt, fish, and trap. We all do it every day. Why in the world would you pass that? And I look back 10 years later and I say, oh my God, I am so proud we passed that, because Wyoming would be faced with a much different world as far as trapping, and trapping ties deeply back into our game populations in Wyoming.
I wish they could trap a few more wolves, but
Yeah.
I saw that post you did on the moose population.
Oh, they've just devastated the unintended consequences of predators are just terrifying what they do. So.
Yeah, it's they should have never been reintroduced. I guess.
Well, or been honest when they did it. You know, that's the same thing as, so that predated, once again, me being in the legislature, but I did go to the hearings in Cheyenne on it. And, you know, the feds and the groups reintroduced and made a cross my heart promise that we're going to have up to 100 wolves in Yellowstone in 9 packs, and they'll be protected in the greater Yellowstone area, but we're going to keep the packs isolated into Yellowstone Park. And if we get packs that are outside, these are an experimental population and we'll kill them.
Yeah.
I can tell you instantly, almost the minute they released them, the lawsuits started happening. Our wolves in Wyoming number in the hundreds now. They're massively slaughtering parts of our game herds.
Well, it's no big deal.
And they're like, well, and then people wonder why people, and in particular ag people, don't trust the federal government.
Oh, yeah.
When they look them in the eye and make them a promise, and then they can't follow, either can't or won't follow the promise.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, for me, I was one of the ones, I didn't have a big deal with an experimental population. It was sold to us on the fact that if this deal impacts things and it doesn't work, it's experimental. We'll just go in and clean them up and get them gone. And, you know, our wolves now have managed to stock big parts of Idaho and Montana and go as far as Colorado at this point.
There's been reports that they're all the way over here now.
Oh yeah, no, there's been unverified, but there's been wolves killed in Grick County.
Yeah.
So
alrighty. Well,
very good. Well, thanks, Clint.
I really appreciate it for sitting down with me. And so, like I said, this channel is going to be political. We're going to talk to people doing things to protect our rights, and we'll talk to you guys the next time. Thank you. Hey guys, we're back. There's a lot talked about in that video, and you know, there's a lot of things that we can all do to try and keep our politicians honest. Ogden's been a senator for a long time. I've always supported him. He's sponsored a few bills that were really good. You got suppressors legal in Wyoming to hunt with. It's really nice. So, you know, we can all take a few lessons, and we can all be harder on our politicians that are doing bad things in states. If we all create a little political pain and we fight the right fight politically, we will end up winning in the long run. And that's the only fight we can fight right now. So that's what we need to be doing, is fighting for our rights, being on top of politicians, being political and professional about it. You know, we're in the middle of a big fight. So let's all band together. Let's start doing the right thing, electing the right people, get out there, campaign, do the things that we need to do right now to protect our rights. It's just one of those things, guys. We all band together and we all do the right thing and we all put in the work, we're going to win. All right, with that, we'll see you next time. Out.